Welcome back to Cheddar's Opening Bell, everyone. Cook's Venture, which has a proprietary breed of its own chicken, has just raised $10 million in a Series A funding round. And for more on exactly what regenerative agriculture is, we're joined by Matt Wadiak, who is the founder and CEO of Cook's Venture. Matt, great to speak with you here today. Explain exactly what makes your chickens different from what you typically find in a grocery store.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So a lot is different about our chickens and what you'd find in a grocery store. For the first part, our bird is the only one, and our company is the only one that isn't connected to the two big genetics conglomerates, Avogen and Cobb. And most folks don't realize that close to 100% of chicken, 99+% of chicken in the United States comes from one of two big companies. So everybody's heard of Monsanto and the big ag companies, John Deere, and understand how that side of the spectrum works. But a lot of folks don't realize that all of the poultry that the companies buy, large companies like Tyson, Purdue, Sanderson, et cetera, comes from essentially two big feeder companies. One of them is Cobb, owned by Tyson, and the other one is Avogen. And everyone from big farms to small farms in America is pigeonholed through this overly consolidated industry to purchase their parent stock birds, which produce the broilers, or their broilers from one of those two large companies. So we are independent. We do all of our own breeding, and we breed 100% of our birds from heritage line birds that we own ourselves, and do that over the course of many generations to provide the highest health, slowest growth, best tasting chickens on the market. And that's just completely different than everything else that's going on out there.
You've essentially privatized a breed of an animal, it sounds like. And if I'm getting that incorrect, please do correct me. But that's what it at least sounds like if I kind of read through some of the classification of it. So have you had any ethical pushback from some of the animal rights groups that are out there?
So we don't privatize a breed of an animal. So that's not really the case. What we do is we maintain heritage line animals, and then we breed them. So by breeding them, we're just mating and hatching eggs to produce chicks. But the way that we do it utilizes the best of the traits of those individual heritage line birds to get desirable traits in the chicks. So it's actually quite the opposite, in that we're breeding for better health versus the entirety of the industry, which breeds fast growth. So the issues that a lot of these companies encounter when they're breeding animal fast growth, particularly chickens, is they don't develop good leg health, they don't develop good organ health, they don't develop good immunity to pathogens in their environment. And by doing what we do, which is low growth heritage line breeding specifically, we're able to produce the birds that you see here, on your screen, which are beautiful, healthy, robust, upright, tasty chickens that have a higher resistance to pathogens in their environment, don't get the same amount of illness as other birds in mainstream operations, and actually taste better. You can taste that the birds have been out on the grass, in the pasture, in the forest. You can taste that they're fed better feed, and they're able to digest and eat that because they have more robust digestive systems. And that's one of the things that we select for when we're looking for selective breeding, which is a very natural process. People have been doing it for many thousands of years. That's very different than, say, like genetic engineering or something like that. We don't do anything like that. We're very focused on health and welfare of animals.
Got it. Okay, and so a lot of people may recognize you, of course, because of your past co-founder, COO with Blue Apron. How did the experience with Blue Apron really kind of define and perhaps push you towards launching Cook's Venture and kind of shape the framework for exactly what the company could do and what it could address within the food market?
Yeah, great question. First and foremost, before even Blue Apron, I've been involved in the culinary world. I was a chef, as a young person in California. Got to know Bill Nyman of Nyman Ranch very well in my days as a chef. And at Blue Apron, one of the things that we did was we acquired BN Ranch, which was Bill Nyman's company. And I traveled all over the world with Bill, exploring animal agriculture and how we could get that culinary experience that was an expectation for me to our customers around the country. And it was really a problem when I learned that all of the poultry out there came from these two different breeds that consolidated up to over 99% of chicken in America. And when
Right.
we were, when you're out there serving millions and millions of people every week, you don't really have a lot of options as to, how do I get better food on the plate coming from animals that I know didn't suffer. And I've got to tell you, what we found is that predominantly, it doesn't matter if animals are labeled free range or organic or, antibiotic free. They're raised in these horrible conditions,
Right.
predominantly, regardless of the label. And I decided that we needed to change this system.
Sure.
And that's when I started Cook's Venture.
Matt, just very quickly while we have you here as well, because one of the huge things during the pandemic that came to light was this meat shortage, and there was a focus around the supply chain part of the overall food industry. And so as I'm thinking about that, for Cook's Venture, how do you ensure that even with a new process like this that is more scientifically based, and then you are going to market with this different type of chicken, how do you ensure that cost is perhaps more advantageous to the overall market and to the end consumers as well? And then additionally, that we don't run into these supply constraints in the future?
That's a really good question, and it's a really important question. And I will say this. The issue and one of the reasons why we saw so much fluctuation in price and availability of meat during the pandemic is, a couple reasons, but they stem from the fact that these really unhealthy, fast-growing breeds, if there's an issue in a plant, which we saw, and those are worker social conditions, which is another major problem. But if the meat, that's growing in the field, if you have poultry that is not healthy and a plant slows down, one of the things that happens is, those folks had to euthanize an incredible amount of animals. Millions and millions and millions of animals were killed because they couldn't even live another week or 2 weeks, and it couldn't be processed in those environments. So we have a few considerations. We have welfare of the animals. Having slower growing breeds would have prevented that.
Mm-hmm.
And having better working conditions in the plants also would have helped immensely. Mm-hmm. And when you're thinking about the speed in which these animals are processed, in these consolidated plants, consolidated breeds,
right.
You're talking about a system that is destined, for failure. And the way that we prevent that is a couple things. We have to invest more in regional American supply chains, so supporting companies that are based regionally and really, break up these overly consolidated industries.
Right.
And, number two, is we need to have healthier animals and slower growing animals. And there's a small cost to that. So, I always say you can buy really cheap chicken, you can buy really cheap pork. But what is the real price of that? What is the human cost of that?
Sure.
And by paying an extra 25 or 50 cents with a company that like ours is vertically integrated, we're getting supply chain efficiency, but it might be an extra 50 cents. I'd say to customers, it's important to support those, not necessarily our companies, but we're included in that cohort, support those kind of because actually preserve human lives, preserving the welfare of animals, and you're preserving our food system and the integrity of our food system.
Matt, this is a much larger conversation. We want to have you back to continue this for sure. Thank you so much for taking the time here on the day, though, and congratulations with Cook's Venture and all of the initiatives that is pushing forward. Founder and CEO of Cook's Venture, Matt Wadiak, joining us here today.